The phone call came at 2:47 a.m. on July 27, 1999. Barry Sanders, the most electrifying running back in NFL history, was on the line with his agent. "I'm done," he said. No warning, no negotiation, just done. The Detroit Lions had just come off a playoff season. Sanders was 30 years old, in his prime, just 1,457 yards away from breaking Walter Payton's all-time rushing record. He walked away from $26 million and left everyone asking the same question: why? The answer, it turned out, was buried in a decade of frustration playing for one of the most dysfunctional franchises in sports. Sanders had carried the Lions on his back for 10 years, making highlight reel runs behind one of the worst offensive lines in football. He'd watched teammates get cut, coaches get fired, and management make one disastrous decision after another. The breaking point came when the Lions drafted running back Cedric Irvin in the fourth round of the 1999 draft. Sanders saw it as a message. They were already planning for life without him, so he left first. He faxed his retirement letter to the Wichita Eagle newspaper and never looked back. The NFL lost one of its greatest talents because a franchise couldn't give him the support he deserved. That story, as shocking as it sounds, barely scratches the surface of the hidden truths buried in NFL history. Brett Favre won a Super Bowl, made 11 Pro Bowls, and retired as the Iron Man of football with 297 consecutive starts. He was supposed to be the ultimate competitor, the gunslinger who loved the game more than anyone. But what the cameras didn't show were the pills. Favre admitted years later that he was addicted to Vicodin during his playing days, popping up to 15 pills at a time just to get through practice. It started after ankle surgery in 1994. The doctors prescribed pain medication, and Favre kept taking it long after the pain subsided. He'd suffer seizures in team meetings, hide medication in his locker, and play entire games in a painkiller-induced fog. His teammates had no idea. The media didn't either. Favre would show up to practice sweating, shaking, and barely able to function, but he'd still take every snap on Sunday. The addiction nearly killed him. In 1996, he had a seizure so severe that his wife found him unconscious on the floor of their home. That's when he finally checked into rehab. The Packers supported him publicly, calling it a courageous decision, but privately, there were concerns about whether he'd ever be the same player. He was. Favre came back and won the MVP award that season, leading the Packers to a Super Bowl victory. But the addiction left scars. Years later, Favre would admit that he doesn't remember large portions of his career, entire games wiped from his memory by the drugs. The Iron Man wasn't made of iron after all. He was held together by prescription pills and sheer willpower. While Favre was battling his demons quietly, Jim McMahon was losing his mind, literally. The former Chicago Bears quarterback who led the 1985 team to one of the most dominant Super Bowl victories in history spent the next 3 decades forgetting where he was. He couldn't remember his children's names. He'd wander around his house lost, not recognizing rooms he'd been in thousands of times. His wife had to help him get dressed in the morning because he'd forget how buttons worked. McMahon was diagnosed with early onset dementia in his 50s, and doctors linked it directly to the hundreds of concussions he sustained during his playing career. The Bears knew he was getting hit in the head repeatedly. The league knew. Nobody stopped it. In one game alone, McMahon took 15 hits to the head and stayed in. There were no concussion protocols, no independent neurologists, no mandatory rest periods. If you could stand, you could play. McMahon later joined a class action lawsuit against the NFL, claiming the league deliberately hid information about the long-term effects of head trauma. He won a settlement, but the money couldn't fix what was broken. His brain was deteriorating, and there was no surgery, no pill, no treatment that could stop it. McMahon's story became one of thousands in the ongoing fight over player safety, but his case was particularly tragic because he'd been such a vibrant, charismatic personality. Watching him struggle to complete sentences in interviews was heartbreaking. The man who once told the world to kiss his ass could barely remember his own address. But not every fall from grace was caused by injury or addiction. Some players destroyed their own legacies with decisions so reckless, so unthinkable, that their names became synonymous with failure. Ryan Leaf was supposed to be the next great quarterback. The San Diego Chargers drafted him second overall in 1998, right after Peyton Manning. Scouts compared him to John Elway. His arm strength was off the charts. He could make every throw. He had size, mobility, and confidence. The Chargers gave him a 4-year, $31.25 million contract with an $11.25 million signing bonus, the largest ever for a rookie at the time. Leaf was set for life before he'd played a single down. Then the season started, and everything fell apart. Leaf's rookie year was a disaster. He threw 2 touchdowns and 15 interceptions. He completed just 45% of his passes. He screamed at reporters who questioned his performance, shoved a camera away during an interview, and berated teammates in the huddle. In one infamous outburst, Leaf cursed out a team reporter in the locker room, telling him to knock it off, before launching into a profanity-laced tirade. The video went viral before viral was even a thing. The Chargers gave him another chance. He got worse. In 1999, he threw 1 touchdown and 12 interceptions. By 2000, he was benched in favor of Moses Moreno, a career backup. The Chargers cut him after the season, and he bounced to Tampa Bay, Dallas, and Seattle, never lasting more than a few months anywhere. By 2002, he was out of the league entirely. Then came the drug arrests. In 2010, Leaf was caught breaking into homes in Montana to steal prescription painkillers. He was arrested again in 2011 for burglarizing a pharmacy. He pleaded guilty to felony burglary and drug possession and was sentenced to 7 years in prison. He served 2 before being paroled, then violated his parole and went back for another year. The kid who was supposed to be the next Manning ended up in a cell, wondering how it all went so wrong. Leaf later got sober, became a motivational speaker, and tried to rebuild his life. But his name will forever be attached to one word: bust. And then there's the story of Junior Seau, a 12-time Pro Bowler and one of the most beloved linebackers in NFL history. Seau played 20 seasons, made over 1,800 tackles, and never missed a game because of injury. He was the embodiment of toughness, the guy who played through broken bones, torn ligaments, and concussions. He was a leader in the locker room, a fan favorite, and a future Hall of Famer. But in 2012, at the age of 43, he shot himself in the chest in his bedroom. His family donated his brain to researchers at Boston University, and the results confirmed what many had suspected. Seau had chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, a degenerative brain disease caused by repeated blows to the head. The disease had ravaged his brain, leading to depression, mood swings, memory loss, and ultimately his suicide. Seau's death became a turning point in the conversation about player safety, but it also revealed something darker. The NFL had known about the dangers of head trauma for years and had done nothing to protect its players. Internal league documents showed that the NFL had conducted its own research on concussions as early as the 1990s, but had buried the findings. They'd created a committee to study the issue, but staffed it with doctors who had financial ties to the league. They'd published studies downplaying the risks and attacked independent researchers who disagreed. Seau's family sued the league, and the case was settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. But the damage was done. Seau's legacy became a cautionary tale about the price of playing football at the highest level. And his death forced the NFL to finally acknowledge that the game was causing permanent brain damage. While Seau's story shocked the world, another legend was quietly battling his own demons. Earl Campbell, the bruising running back who terrorized defenses in the late 70s and early 80s, spent his post-retirement years in constant pain. Campbell rushed for over 9,000 yards in just 8 seasons, winning 3 rushing titles and an MVP award. He was a battering ram, a 5'11", 232-pound freight train who ran through defenders rather than around them. But the punishment he took on the field left him barely able to walk. By his 50s, Campbell needed a cane just to move from room to room. By his 60s, he could barely stand without assistance. He underwent multiple surgeries to repair the damage to his spine, fusing vertebrae and removing discs, but nothing worked. The pain was constant, debilitating, and unrelenting. Campbell later admitted in interviews that he regretted playing football, saying the pain wasn't worth the glory. He couldn't play with his grandchildren. He couldn't work in his yard. He couldn't do the simple things that most people take for granted. His story is a reminder that every highlight reel run, every broken tackle, every punishing hit came at a cost, and that cost compounded over time. Campbell eventually found some relief through a combination of surgery and stem cell treatment, but the damage was permanent. The Hall of Famer who once ran over linebackers now struggled to walk to his mailbox. Not every legend's fall was tragic, though. Some were just bizarre. Chad Johnson, formerly known as Chad Ochocinco, was one of the most talented wide receivers of his generation. He made 6 Pro Bowls, led the league in receiving yards, and became famous for his elaborate touchdown celebrations. He once put on a Hall of Fame jacket after scoring. He proposed to a cheerleader in the end zone. He celebrated with a freestyle rap session. Fans loved him because he brought personality to a league that often felt robotic. But his career ended not because of injuries or declining performance, but because of a domestic violence incident. In 2012, during a preseason game with the Miami Dolphins, Johnson headbutted his wife, Evelyn Lozada, during an argument in their driveway. She called the police, and Johnson was arrested for domestic battery. The Dolphins cut him immediately, and no other team would touch him. His career was over at 34, and his legacy was permanently tarnished. Johnson later expressed deep regret for his actions, saying it was the biggest mistake of his life, but the damage was done. He went from being one of the most entertaining players in the league to a cautionary tale about how quickly everything can fall apart. Johnson tried to stay relevant through reality TV, social media, and even a brief stint playing indoor football, but he never regained the spotlight. The entertaining wide receiver who once made football fun to watch became a reminder that off-field behavior matters just as much as on-field performance. Then there's the hidden truth about Ricky Williams, the Heisman Trophy winner who was supposed to be the next great running back. The New Orleans Saints traded their entire 1999 draft, all 8 picks, plus their first and third round picks in 2000, to move up and select Williams. It was the most lopsided trade in draft history, and the pressure on Williams was immense. For a while, it looked like a smart move. Williams rushed for over 1,000 yards in his second season and seemed destined for greatness. But then he quit. In 2004, at the peak of his career with the Miami Dolphins, Williams announced he was retiring from football to travel the world and study holistic medicine. The real reason? He had failed multiple drug tests for marijuana and didn't want to face another suspension. Williams eventually returned to the NFL in 2005, but his career never fully recovered. He bounced between Miami, Baltimore, and Toronto in the CFL, dealing with injuries and suspensions along the way. He retired for good in 2011 with over 10,000 career rushing yards, but he's remembered more for walking away than for what he accomplished. Years later, Williams opened up about his struggles with social anxiety disorder, revealing that he had used marijuana to self-medicate. He said he hated the attention that came with being an NFL player, hated the interviews, hated the crowds, hated the pressure. Football made him miserable, and marijuana was the only thing that helped. His story highlighted the NFL's outdated drug policies and the mental health struggles many players face in silence. Williams eventually found peace, becoming a yoga instructor and cannabis advocate, but his NFL legacy remains complicated. Was he a quitter who wasted his talent, Or was he a man who chose his mental health over a game that was destroying him? The answer depends on who you ask. But while Williams walked away on his own terms, Terrell Owens had his career ripped away from him. Owens was one of the most dominant receivers in NFL history, second all-time in receiving yards and third in touchdowns when he retired. But he never got a proper farewell. Teams stopped calling after the 2010 season, not because he couldn't play. He still had over 900 receiving yards at age 37, but because nobody wanted to deal with the drama. Owens had burned bridges everywhere he went. In San Francisco, he clashed with quarterback Jeff Garcia and did sit-ups in his driveway during a contract dispute. In Philadelphia, he accused Donovan McNabb of being a weak leader and got suspended for the final 7 games of the 2005 season. In Dallas, he blamed Tony Romo for losses and created a locker room civil war. In Buffalo, he was invisible. By the time he was ready to retire, no team would take him. Owens spent years waiting for a Hall of Fame call that didn't come until 2018, and even then, he refused to attend the ceremony in Canton. He held his own induction at the University of Tennessee, Chattanooga, the school where he played college football. It was a fitting end for a player who did things his way, even if it cost him everything. But Owens' story also raises an uncomfortable question. How much behavior should teams tolerate from talented players? And at what point does the drama outweigh the production? The NFL never figured out how to handle Owens, and as a result, one of the greatest receivers ever was essentially blackballed from the league. And speaking of players who did things their own way, Randy Moss redefined what it meant to be a wide receiver. Moss had the size, speed, and hands to dominate any defense, and for a decade, he did exactly that. He revolutionized the deep ball, forcing defenses to double and triple team him on every play. But Moss also had a reputation for being difficult. He admitted to smoking marijuana throughout his career. He walked off the field during a game with the Minnesota Vikings. He said he played when he wanted to play, implying that he sometimes took plays off. He openly criticized teammates and coaches, once calling the Vikings' offensive play calling disgusting. Despite all of that, Moss finished his career with over 15,000 receiving yards and 156 touchdowns, second only to Jerry Rice. But like Owens, Moss never got the farewell he deserved. He retired in 2013 after a forgettable season with the San Francisco 49ers, and his legacy remains complicated. Some see him as one of the greatest ever, a generational talent who changed the game. Others see him as a talented player who never fully committed, who could have been even better if he'd cared more. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Moss was brilliant when he wanted to be, but his inconsistency kept him from reaching the absolute peak of his potential. Still, his impact on the game is undeniable, and his highlights are some of the most jaw-dropping in NFL history. But not every controversial figure in NFL history was a player. Some of the darkest stories involve the people who were supposed to protect the game. Art Modell, the owner of the Cleveland Browns, made one of the most hated decisions in sports history when he moved the team to Baltimore in 1996. Modell had owned the Browns for over 30 years, but financial troubles stemming from renovations to Cleveland Stadium forced him to look for a way out. Baltimore offered him a brand new stadium and a sweetheart lease deal. Cleveland fans were devastated. The city sued to keep the team, and eventually, a compromise was reached. The Browns' name, colors, and history would stay in Cleveland, while Modell took the players and staff to Baltimore, where they became the Ravens. The Ravens won a Super Bowl in 2000, one of the most dominant defensive performances in playoff history. But Modell's legacy in Cleveland was destroyed. He was booed at public events, received death threats, and was never inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Despite his contributions to the league, including helping negotiate the NFL's first television contracts and creating Monday Night Football, Modell died in 2012, still bitter about how things ended, still defending his decision, and still hoping for Hall of Fame recognition that never came. His story is a reminder that in professional sports, loyalty means nothing when money is on the line. While Modell's decision was controversial, it paled in comparison to what Al Davis did to the city of Oakland. Davis, the legendary owner of the Raiders, moved the team to Los Angeles in 1982, then back to Oakland in 1995, then threatened to move them again before his death in 2011. The Raiders eventually relocated to Las Vegas in 2020, leaving Oakland without a team for the second time in 4 decades. Davis was a maverick who fought the NFL establishment at every turn. He sued the league multiple times, won landmark cases that gave owners more control over relocation, and built a reputation as a rebel who played by his own rules. But his constant threats to relocate left a trail of broken promises and angry fans. Oakland had supported the Raiders through decades of losing seasons, stuck with them when other cities might have given up, and in return, they were abandoned twice. Davis's legacy is complicated. Some see him as a visionary who challenged authority and built one of the most iconic franchises in sports. Others see him as a greedy owner who prioritized profit over loyalty and destroyed the bond between a team and its city. The truth is probably both. Davis was brilliant and ruthless, innovative and selfish. A man who changed the NFL but left destruction in his wake. But if you want to talk about greed and mismanagement, look no further than the story of Vince Young. The former University of Texas quarterback was the 3rd overall pick in the 2006 NFL Draft, selected by the Tennessee Titans. Young had a cannon for an arm, could run like a running back, and led the Titans to a 10-6 record as a rookie. He was named Offensive Rookie of the Year and looked like a future star, the kind of player who could carry a franchise for a decade. But then the money started disappearing. Young earned over $26 million during his 6-year NFL career, but by 2014, he was broke. He had spent it all on private jets, jewelry, expensive cars, and nights at strip clubs where he'd reportedly dropped $6,000 in a single evening. He bought a fleet of cars, including a Range Rover, a Cadillac Escalade, and multiple luxury sedans. He spent $300,000 at a single restaurant chain, the Cheesecake Factory, earning him the nickname Cheesecake Factory Guy among his teammates. Young filed for bankruptcy in 2014, claiming he owed over $1.8 million in debts to creditors, including $1.7 million to a financial advisory firm that had tried to help him manage his money. His story became a cautionary tale about financial mismanagement, and it revealed a larger problem in the NFL. Many players come from poverty, earn millions overnight, and have no idea how to manage it. They're surrounded by family and friends asking for loans, agents and advisors taking cuts, and lifestyle creep that spirals out of control. The league has since implemented financial literacy programs, but for players like Young, it was too late. He lost everything, and his NFL career, which had started with so much promise, ended as a warning about what happens when you're not prepared for sudden wealth. Young wasn't the only player to lose everything after football. Mark Brunell, a 3-time Pro Bowl quarterback who earned over $50 million during his career, filed for bankruptcy in 2010. He had invested in real estate ventures in Florida and Georgia, including Whataburger franchises and development projects that collapsed during the 2008 financial crisis, leaving him with $25 million in debt. Bernie Kosar, the beloved Cleveland Browns quarterback, also went bankrupt after a series of bad investments and a costly divorce. And then there's Warren Sapp, the Hall of Fame defensive tackle who earned over $82 million during his 13-year career. Sapp filed for bankruptcy in 2012, claiming he had just $826 in cash and owed nearly $7 million to creditors. His financial collapse was swift and total. He owed $700,000 in child support, $700,000 in alimony, and had debts to everyone from his barber to his accountant. Sapp's fall from grace was public and humiliating, and it served as yet another reminder that NFL careers are short but financial mistakes can last a lifetime. The league has tried to address the issue with mandatory rookie symposiums and financial planning resources, but the culture around spending remains a problem. Players feel pressure to live up to their contracts, to show their success, to take care of everyone who helped them get there. And by the time they realize the money is running out, it's too late to save. But not every story of financial ruin was the result of bad investments or extravagant spending. Some players lost everything because of addiction. Chris Carter, the Hall of Fame wide receiver, admitted that he spent over $1 million on cocaine during his playing days. Carter was one of the most productive receivers in NFL history, catching over 1,000 passes and 130 touchdowns during a 16-year career. But behind the scenes, he was battling a drug addiction that nearly destroyed him. Carter started using cocaine in college, and the habit followed him to the NFL. He'd use before games, after games, during the off-season. He'd disappear for days, missing team meetings and practices. The Philadelphia Eagles, who drafted him in the 4th round in 1987, gave up on him after just 3 seasons. Carter later said that being released by the Eagles saved his life. It was the wake-up call he needed. He got clean, became a born-again Christian, and signed with the Minnesota Vikings, where he rebuilt his career and his reputation. Carter eventually became one of the league's most respected voices, working as an analyst and mentor to younger players. His story is one of redemption, but it also highlights the darker side of professional sports, where addiction often goes unchecked until it's too late. The NFL has implemented substance abuse programs and support systems, but for decades, the league turned a blind eye to players struggling with drugs and alcohol. As long as they could perform on Sunday, their personal lives didn't matter. Carter's willingness to speak openly about his addiction helped change that culture. But the damage had already been done to countless players who didn't get a second chance. And then there's the story of Lawrence Taylor, arguably the greatest defensive player in NFL history. Taylor revolutionized the linebacker position, terrorizing quarterbacks and winning 2 Super Bowls with the New York Giants. He was named NFL MVP in 1986, a rare honor for a defensive player, and finished his career with a 132.5 sacks, 9 Pro Bowls, and a Hall of Fame induction in 1999. But Taylor also had a well-documented cocaine addiction that plagued him throughout his career and beyond. He failed multiple drug tests, was suspended by the league in 1988 for violating the substance abuse policy, and was arrested numerous times after retirement. In 2010, Taylor was arrested for soliciting a 16-year-old prostitute, a case that shocked even his most loyal fans. According to police reports, Taylor had responded to an online ad and paid $300 for sex, not knowing the girl was underage. He pleaded guilty to sexual misconduct and patronizing a prostitute and was sentenced to 6 years of probation and required to register as a sex offender. Taylor's legacy on the field is undeniable. He changed the way the game is played, but his off-field behavior left a permanent stain on his reputation. His story raises uncomfortable questions about how we separate the art from the artist, the player from the person. Can you celebrate Taylor's dominance on the field while condemning his actions off it? Or does one taint the other? The NFL has never answered that question definitively, and Taylor's legacy remains a point of debate among fans and historians. While Taylor's legal troubles made headlines, another legend was quietly suffering in obscurity. Ken Stabler, the Hall of Fame quarterback who led the Oakland Raiders to a Super Bowl victory in 1977, spent his final years battling chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Stabler's family donated his brain to researchers at Boston University after his death in 2015, and the results showed severe CTE, among the worst cases they'd ever seen. The disease had caused significant damage to his brain, leading to memory loss, mood swings, and cognitive decline in his final years. Stabler's case was particularly significant because he was a quarterback, a position not typically associated with the kind of brutal hits that linemen and linebackers endure. His diagnosis proved that no position is safe from the long-term effects of head trauma, that even quarterbacks, who are protected by rules and penalties, can develop brain damage from years of playing football. Stabler's family joined the growing list of former players and their families suing the NFL over concussions, and his case became part of a landmark settlement that awarded billions to retired players. But no amount of money could undo the damage. Stabler's final years were marked by confusion and decline, and his death served as another reminder that the game takes more than it gives. But while Stabler's story added to the growing body of evidence about CTE, another quarterback was making headlines for very different reasons. Johnny Manziel, the 2012 Heisman Trophy winner, was supposed to be the future of the Cleveland Browns. The team traded up to draft him in the first round in 2014, giving up an additional first-round pick to move from 26th to 22nd overall. Fans were ecstatic. Manziel had the swagger, the arm, and the playmaking ability to be special. He'd beaten Alabama as a freshman, won the Heisman, and become a cultural phenomenon known as Johnny Football. But he also had a partying problem that everyone ignored. Manziel spent more time in nightclubs than he did studying film. He showed up to meetings hungover, missed team events, and was eventually diagnosed with bipolar disorder. The Browns cut him after just 2 seasons, and no other NFL team would take a chance on him. Manziel later admitted in an interview with Good Morning America that he had been drinking heavily throughout his NFL career and that his mental health had spiraled out of control. He said he'd wake up in Las Vegas hotel rooms with no memory of how he got there, that he'd missed team meetings because he was too drunk to function, and that he'd contemplated suicide multiple times. Manziel attempted a comeback in the Canadian Football League and the Alliance of American Football, but both stints ended quickly. He was out of shape, unprepared, and still battling his demons. Manziel's story is a reminder that talent alone isn't enough, that without discipline, mental stability, and support, even the most gifted players can flame out spectacularly. And speaking of flaming out, let's talk about Jamarcus Russell, widely considered the biggest draft bust in NFL history. The Oakland Raiders selected Russell first overall in 2007, passing on Calvin Johnson, Adrian Peterson, and Patrick Willis. The hype was off the charts. Russell had a rocket arm, stood 6'6", and weighed 260 pounds. Scouts compared him to Dante Culpepper and Byron Leftwich. The Raiders gave him a 6-year, $68 million contract with $32 million guaranteed, the largest rookie deal in NFL history at the time. Russell was supposed to be the franchise savior, the quarterback who would return the Raiders to glory. Instead, he became a punchline. He reported to camp overweight, tipping the scales at over 280 pounds. He struggled to read defenses, held the ball too long, and missed open receivers. He was benched multiple times, and by his 3rd season, he was out of the league. Reports later surfaced that Russell had been drinking lean, a mixture of codeine cough syrup and soda, throughout his career. He had also stopped working out entirely, ballooning to over 300 pounds. Former teammates said he'd show up to the facility, eat fast food, and leave without watching film. The Raiders released him in 2010, and he never played another snap. Russell's failure cost the Raiders years of rebuilding, millions of dollars, and credibility in the eyes of fans and players. His story remains the cautionary tale for every team considering drafting a quarterback with red flags. Talent means nothing without work ethic, and Russell had none. But while Russell's career was defined by laziness and poor decision-making, Tim Tebow's career was derailed by something entirely different: the inability to throw a football accurately. Tebow won 2 national championships at the University of Florida, won the Heisman Trophy, and became one of the most beloved college players of all time. The Denver Broncos drafted him in the 1st round in 2010, a controversial pick that had scouts and analysts scratching their heads. Tebow's throwing motion was broken, his accuracy was inconsistent, and there were serious questions about whether his college success would translate to the NFL. For one magical season, it didn't matter. Tebow led the Broncos to the playoffs in 2011 through one of the most memorable touchdown passes in postseason history against the Pittsburgh Steelers and became a cultural phenomenon. Tebow Mania took over the NFL, with fans praying in the end zone, celebrities attending his games, and debate shows dedicating hours to analyzing his unconventional style. But his throwing motion was still broken, his accuracy was still inconsistent, and teams quickly figured out how to stop him. The Broncos traded him to the New York Jets in 2012, where he barely played. He was cut after one season, and no other team gave him a real chance. Tebow attempted comebacks in the CFL, minor league baseball with the New York Mets organization, and even as a tight end with the Jacksonville Jaguars in 2021, but none of them worked. His story is bittersweet. He gave everything to the game, inspired millions with his faith and determination, but the game didn't need him anymore. Tebow's career is a reminder that sometimes heart and determination aren't enough, that at the highest level, you need the skills to match. While Tebow's career fizzled out, Colin Kaepernick's career ended in controversy that transcended sports. Kaepernick led the San Francisco 49ers to a Super Bowl appearance in 2012 and was one of the most dynamic quarterbacks in the league for several years. But in 2016, he made a decision that changed everything. During the preseason, Kaepernick began kneeling during the national anthem to protest police brutality and racial injustice. The gesture sparked a national debate that divided the country. Some praised him as a civil rights hero, comparing him to Muhammad Ali and Tommy Smith. Others condemned him as unpatriotic, saying he was disrespecting the flag, the military, and the country. President Donald Trump called for NFL owners to fire any player who knelt, saying they should get that son of a bitch off the field. The NFL, caught in the middle, tried to navigate the controversy but ultimately sided with the critics. After the 2016 season, no team would sign Kaepernick. He filed a grievance against the league, claiming collusion, and the case was settled out of court in 2019 for an undisclosed amount believed to be less than $10 million. Kaepernick hasn't played in the NFL since, but his impact on the sport and society is undeniable. His protest sparked a movement that forced the league to reckon with social justice issues, inspired countless athletes to use their platforms for change, and turned him into a global symbol of activism. Nike made him the face of a controversial ad campaign with the tagline, "Believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything," and the ad became one of the most successful in the company's history. Whether you agree with Kaepernick's methods or not, his legacy extends far beyond football, and his name will be remembered long after his statistics are forgotten. But not every player who walked away from the game did so because of protest or controversy. Some left because their bodies couldn't take it anymore. Calvin Johnson, one of the most dominant receivers in NFL history, retired at just 30 years old after 9 seasons with the Detroit Lions. Johnson had everything: size at 6'5", speed that allowed him to run past defensive backs, hands that could catch anything, and the ability to take over games single-handedly. He led the league in receiving yards twice, made 6 Pro Bowls, and set the single-season receiving yards record in 2012 with 1,004 yards. But the Lions never won a playoff game during his career, never gave him the support he needed, and the toll of playing on a losing team, combined with the physical punishment he endured, led him to walk away. Johnson later admitted that he was bitter about how the Lions handled his retirement, specifically their request that he repay $1 million of his signing bonus because he retired early. The relationship between Johnson and the organization remained strained for years, with Johnson refusing to attend team events and publicly criticizing the front office. It wasn't until 2021, after the Lions paid him back the disputed bonus, that they reconciled. Johnson's early retirement was a loss for the NFL, a Hall of Fame career cut short by mismanagement and physical toll, but it also highlighted the harsh reality that playing football destroys the body And sometimes, the smartest decision is to walk away while you still can. And then there's the story of Andrew Luck, the quarterback who was supposed to save the Indianapolis Colts franchise for the next 15 years. Luck was the first overall pick in 2012, chosen ahead of Robert Griffin III and Russell Wilson, and for his first few seasons, he lived up to the hype. He led the Colts to the playoffs 4 times in his first 5 seasons, threw for over 4,000 yards multiple times, and looked like the next great quarterbacks, the heir to Peyton Manning's legacy. But the hits kept coming, and the Colts did nothing to protect him. Luck suffered a lacerated kidney that left him urinating blood. He tore his labrum, requiring surgery. He cracked ribs, suffered concussions, and dealt with a lingering calf injury that never fully healed. By 2019, at just 29 years old, he'd had enough. During a preseason game against the Chicago Bears, Luck announced his retirement in a tearful press conference. He cited the constant cycle of injury and rehab as the reason, saying he was mentally exhausted from the pain and the recovery process. Colts fans in attendance actually booed him as he walked off the field, a shocking and cruel reaction to a player who had given everything to the franchise. But Luck didn't care about the reaction. He chose his health and happiness over football, and he never looked back. His decision was controversial at the time, with many questioning whether he gave up too easily, but in hindsight, it looks like one of the bravest decisions any player has ever made. In a sport that glorifies toughness and playing through pain, Luck chose to listen to his body and walk away, prioritizing his future over the game that had nearly broken him. But while Luck's retirement was met with disappointment, Rob Gronkowski's first retirement was met with skepticism. Gronkowski, one of the greatest tight ends in NFL history, retired in 2019 after 9 seasons with the New England Patriots. He had won 3 Super Bowls, made 5 Pro Bowls, and set records for touchdowns by a tight end. But his body was breaking down in ways that weren't immediately visible to fans. He'd had multiple back surgeries, including one that required a metal plate and 4 screws. He'd had arm surgeries, knee surgeries, ankle surgeries, and had dealt with more injuries than most players accumulate in a 15-year career. Gronkowski later admitted in interviews that he'd been dealing with symptoms consistent with chronic traumatic encephalopathy, including memory loss, mood swings, and confusion, and that he feared permanent brain damage if he kept playing. He walked away at 30, seemingly for good. But the retirement didn't last long. In 2020, when Tom Brady left New England for Tampa Bay, he convinced Gronkowski to come out of retirement and join him. The two won another Super Bowl together, proving they were still the most dangerous quarterback-tight end duo in football. Gronkowski retired again after the 2021 season, this time seemingly for good. His story is a reminder that the lure of football is powerful, even when your body is begging you to stop, and that sometimes it takes multiple attempts to actually walk away. Speaking of players who couldn't stay away, Marshawn Lynch retired and unretired multiple times during his career, each time with less fanfare than the last. Lynch, known for his bruising running style and his refusal to talk to the media, first retired in 2016 after 10 seasons, 7 of which were spent with the Seattle Seahawks. He'd rushed for over 10,000 yards, made 5 Pro Bowls, and scored one of the most memorable touchdowns in playoff history, the 2011 Beastquake run against the New Orleans Saints. But just 1 year after retiring, he came out of retirement to play for his hometown Oakland Raiders. He played 2 seasons in Oakland, posting modest numbers and dealing with injuries, then retired again. Then, in 2019, he came out of retirement again to help the Seattle Seahawks during a playoff push after their starting running back got injured. Lynch's on-again, off-again relationship with football was emblematic of how difficult it is for players to walk away from the game. The adrenaline, the competition, the camaraderie, the roar of the crowd, it's all addictive. And for players like Lynch, retirement never quite felt right. He'd try civilian life, get bored, and return to the only thing he'd ever known. His final retirement came after the 2019 season, and this time, it stuck. But his multiple comebacks showed that football isn't something you can just turn off. That for many players, it's an identity, not just a job. But not every retirement was complicated or drawn out. Peyton Manning's retirement was perfect, almost too perfect. Manning retired after winning Super Bowl 50 in 2016, riding off into the sunset as a champion at age 39. He finished his career with 5 MVP awards, 2 Super Bowl rings, and nearly every major passing record, including most career passing yards and touchdowns at the time. Manning's farewell was everything a legend could hope for: a championship, a Hall of Fame induction 5 years later, and a legacy that will never be questioned. But even Manning's career had its controversies that threatened to taint his perfect ending. In 2016, just before his retirement, an Al Jazeera documentary alleged that Manning had used human growth hormone during his recovery from multiple neck surgeries in 2011. The report claimed that HGH had been shipped to Manning's house in Florida under his wife Ashley's name, a common tactic for athletes trying to avoid detection. Manning vehemently denied the allegations, calling them garbage and threatening to sue Al Jazeera. The NFL investigated but found no evidence of wrongdoing, and the story faded quickly from headlines. But the allegations served as a reminder that even the most respected, most beloved players aren't immune to controversy, and that in the NFL, everyone's legacy is just one scandal away from being tarnished. And then there's Tom Brady, the player who defied age, logic, and every expectation placed upon him. Brady played until he was 45 years old, won 7 Super Bowls, 5 Super Bowl MVPs, 3 regular season MVPs, and retired as the greatest quarterback in NFL history by virtually every metric. But his career wasn't without controversy. There was Spygate in 2007, when the Patriots were caught illegally videotaping the New York Jets' defensive signals from the sideline. The scandal resulted in a $500,000 fine for head coach Bill Belichick, a $250,000 fine for the team, and the loss of a first-round draft pick. Critics said the Patriots had been cheating for years, that Spygate explained their dynasty, and that Brady's 3 Super Bowl rings should have asterisks next to them. Then came Deflategate in 2015, when Brady was accused of being generally aware of a scheme to deflate footballs below the league-mandated PSI level. The NFL suspended him for 4 games, and the controversy dominated sports media for over a year. Brady appealed, took the case to federal court, and eventually served the suspension in 2016. He returned and led the Patriots to the greatest comeback in Super Bowl history, erasing a 25-point deficit against the Atlanta Falcons. Throughout his career, there were constant questions about whether his success was due to talent, coaching, defensive support, or something less legitimate. But Brady's move to Tampa Bay in 2020 silenced many of those critics. Without Belichick, without the Patriot system, Brady won another Super Bowl in his first season, proving he could succeed anywhere. When he finally retired in 2023, after one disappointing season in Tampa, it felt like the end of an era. But even then, rumors swirled that he might come back for one more season. Brady's career was so long, so successful, and so improbable that it's hard to believe it's really over. But while Brady's career is celebrated universally, Aaron Hernandez's career is remembered for all the wrong reasons. Hernandez was a promising tight end for the New England Patriots, a 4th-round pick out of the University of Florida who quickly became one of Tom Brady's favorite targets. In 2011, Hernandez and Rob Gronkowski formed one of the most dangerous tight end duos in NFL history, combining for over 2,200 receiving yards and 24 touchdowns. Hernandez signed a 5-year, $40 million contract extension in 2012, and it looked like he was set for a long, lucrative career. But in June 2013, just months after that contract extension, Hernandez was arrested and charged with the murder of Odin Lloyd, a semi-professional football player who was dating Hernandez's fiance's sister. The evidence was overwhelming. Surveillance footage showed Hernandez leaving his house with Lloyd. Shell casings matched a gun found at Hernandez's home, and Lloyd's body was found less than a mile from Hernandez's house with multiple gunshot wounds. Hernandez was convicted of first-degree murder in 2015 and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But the case didn't end there. While in prison, Hernandez was tried for 2 additional murders from 2012, the shooting deaths of Daniel de Abreu and Safiro Furtado outside a Boston nightclub. He was acquitted of those charges in 2017, but just days later, he was found dead in his prison cell, having hanged himself with a bedsheet. After his death, doctors at Boston University examined Hernandez's brain and found severe CTE, some of the worst they'd ever seen in a person his age. The discovery raised uncomfortable questions about how much the disease contributed to his violent behavior, whether football had damaged his brain to the point where he couldn't control his impulses. But it didn't change the fact that Hernandez had murdered someone, destroyed countless lives, and thrown away a career that could have made him a Hall of Famer. His story is one of the darkest in NFL history, a reminder that football can bring out the worst in people, not just the best. And then there's the hidden truth about Darren Sharper, the 5-time Pro Bowl safety who won a Super Bowl with the New Orleans Saints in 2009. Sharper was respected as one of the smartest defensive players in the game, a ball hawk who could read quarterbacks like a book and jump routes before receivers even broke. He finished his career with 63 interceptions, 11th all-time, and transitioned seamlessly into broadcasting after retirement, becoming a regular analyst on NFL Network. But after his retirement, a much darker truth emerged that shattered his reputation. Between 2013 and 2014, Sharper was accused of drugging and sexually assaulting multiple women in 4 different states: California, Nevada, Arizona, and Louisiana. The allegations were horrifying in their consistency. Sharper would meet women at bars or clubs, slip drugs like Ambien or morphine into their drinks, and then assault them while they were unconscious. Investigators eventually linked him to assaults involving at least 16 women, though the actual number may be higher. In 2016, Sharper pleaded guilty to multiple charges as part of a plea deal and was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. The NFL community was stunned. Sharper had been a respected player, a charismatic personality, and a regular presence on television. But behind the smile was a serial predator who used his fame and charm to target vulnerable women. His crimes revealed just how little we truly know about the people we idolize, and how easily someone can hide their true nature behind a public persona. The Hall of Fame, which had been considering Sharper for induction, immediately removed him from consideration, and NFL Network scrubbed his appearances from their archives. His legacy went from respected player to cautionary tale almost overnight. While Sharper's crimes shocked the world and revealed the darkest side of NFL celebrity, another former player was quietly making headlines for a very different reason. Warrick Dunn, the former Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Atlanta Falcons running back, spent his post-NFL career giving back to the community in ways that restored faith in humanity. Dunn's mother, Betty Smothers, was a police officer in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, who was killed in the line of duty when Warrick was just 18 years old. She was ambushed and shot while working an off-duty security job at a grocery store. Dunn, the oldest of 6 children, promised his mother he'd take care of his younger siblings, and he kept that promise while playing college football at Florida State and throughout his NFL career. After retiring in 2008, Dunn started the Warrick Dunn Charities Foundation, which helps single parents buy their first homes. The program, called Homes for the Holidays, provides down payments, furniture, food, and financial support to families transitioning out of poverty. To date, Dunn has helped over 200 families achieve homeownership, impacting hundreds of children and breaking cycles of poverty. His work earned him the Walter Payton NFL Man of the Year award in 2004, but he's continued the mission long after his playing days ended. Dunn's story is a reminder that not every NFL player's legacy is defined by what they did on the field. Some leave a lasting impact through their actions off the field, and Dunn's commitment to helping others is one of the most inspiring stories in sports. But for every Warwick Dunn, there's a story like Ray Caruth's that reminds us how dark humanity can get. Caruth was a first-round pick by the Carolina Panthers in 1997, the 27th overall selection, a talented wide receiver out of the University of Colorado with speed and route-running ability. But in November 1999, Caruth orchestrated a plot to kill his pregnant girlfriend, Sherika Adams, because he didn't want to pay child support. According to prosecutors, Caruth hired a hitman and planned the entire murder. On the night of November 15, 1999, Caruth drove in front of Adams's car, slowing down and blocking her in while a second car pulled up alongside and opened fire. Adams was shot 4 times while 7 months pregnant. She managed to call 911 and identify Caruth as the person responsible before she lost consciousness. Paramedics rushed her to the hospital, where doctors performed an emergency C-section. Her son, Chancellor Lee Adams, survived, but he was born with permanent brain damage due to the trauma and lack of oxygen. Sherika Adams died a month later from her injuries. Caruth fled after the shooting, sparking a nationwide manhunt. He was found hiding in the trunk of a car in Tennessee and brought back to face trial. In 2001, he was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder and sentenced to nearly 19 years in prison. He was released in October 2018 and has since attempted to reach out to his son, who is now in his 20s and lives with his grandmother, Sandra Adams. Chancellor requires round-the-clock care due to his cerebral palsy, but he's defied expectations, graduated high school, and even started college courses. Caruth's name will forever be associated with one of the most heinous crimes in NFL history, a man who valued money over human life and destroyed multiple families in the process. And then there's O.J. Simpson, a case so famous it transcended sports and became a defining cultural moment of the 1990s. Simpson wasn't just a football star. He was a cultural icon who broke barriers and became one of the first black athletes to achieve mainstream crossover success. He won the Heisman Trophy at USC in 1968, was drafted first overall by the Buffalo Bills in 1969, and went on to rush for over 11,000 yards and 61 touchdowns during his 11-year career. In 1973, he became the first player to rush for over 2,000 yards in a single season, a record that stood for decades. After retiring, Simpson transitioned seamlessly into acting and broadcasting, appearing in movies like the Naked Gun series and working as a sideline reporter for ABC and NBC. He was beloved, charismatic, and seemed to have it all. But everything changed on June 12, 1994, when his ex-wife Nicole Brown Simpson and her friend Ron Goldman were brutally murdered outside Nicole's Los Angeles home. Suspicion immediately fell on Simpson, especially after evidence showed he had a history of domestic violence against Nicole. When police attempted to arrest him, Simpson led them on a now infamous low-speed chase in a white Ford Bronco, broadcast live on national television and watched by over 95 million people. The trial that followed became the most sensational court case in American history, dubbed the Trial of the Century. It had everything: celebrity lawyers, including Johnny Cochran and Robert Shapiro, racial tension that divided the country, media spectacle with cameras in the courtroom, and the unforgettable moment when Simpson tried on the bloody glove found at the crime scene and it didn't fit, leading Cochran to deliver his famous line, "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit." In October 1995, after a trial that lasted over 8 months, the jury found Simpson not guilty of both murders, a verdict that deeply divided the country along racial lines. Many black Americans saw the verdict as justice, believing Simpson had been targeted by a racist police department. Many white Americans saw it as a miscarriage of justice, convinced that a guilty man had walked free. But Simpson's legal troubles didn't end there. In 1997, he was found liable for both deaths in a civil suit brought by the victims' families and ordered to pay $33.5 million in damages, money he never fully paid. Years later, in 2007, Simpson was arrested in Las Vegas for armed robbery and kidnapping after attempting to reclaim sports memorabilia he claimed was stolen from him. He was convicted and sentenced to 33 years in prison, though many believe the harsh sentence was payback for the murder acquittal. Simpson served 9 years and was released on parole in 2017. He spent his final years playing golf, posting on social media, and maintaining his innocence in the murder case until his death in April 2024. Simpson's story is a reminder that fame and success can't protect you from the consequences of your actions, and that legacy is fragile, easily destroyed by a single moment of violence. But while Simpson's case dominated headlines and sparked national debates about race and justice, another tragedy was unfolding that would change the way we think about player safety forever. Mike Webster, the Hall of Fame center for the Pittsburgh Steelers, spent his final years homeless, confused, and in constant pain. Webster played 17 seasons in the NFL, won 4 Super Bowls, and was the anchor of one of the greatest offensive lines in football history. But after retiring in 1990, his life fell apart. He couldn't hold a job, lost his house, and ended up living in his car or at the Pittsburgh Amtrak station. He'd superglue his teeth back into his mouth because he couldn't afford a dentist. He'd tase himself with a stun gun just to fall asleep because the pain was so unbearable. Friends and family didn't understand what was happening. Webster had always been sharp, disciplined, and responsible. Now he was erratic, forgetful, and barely functional. In 2002, Webster died of a heart attack at age 50. He was only 50 years old, but his body and brain had aged far beyond that. After his death, forensic pathologist Dr. Bennett Omalu examined Webster's brain and discovered something shocking: chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE. It was the first time the disease had been identified in a football player, and it changed everything. Omalu published his findings in 2005, and the NFL immediately pushed back, calling his research flawed and attacking his credibility. But more cases followed. Andre Waters, a former Philadelphia Eagles safety, killed himself in 2006 at age 44. His brain showed severe CTE. Terry Long, a former Steelers offensive lineman, committed suicide in 2005 by drinking antifreeze. His brain showed CTE. Dave Duerson, a former Chicago Bears safety and Super Bowl champion, shot himself in the chest in 2011 so his brain could be studied. His suicide note specifically requested that his brain be examined for CTE, and it was. The disease was there, unmistakable and devastating. The floodgates opened. Dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of former players came forward with symptoms: memory loss, depression, mood swings, violent outbursts, suicidal thoughts. The NFL could no longer ignore the evidence. In 2013, the league agreed to a settlement with former players that would eventually pay out billions in compensation for brain injuries. But the damage had already been done. Thousands of men who had dedicated their lives to football were now suffering, and the game they loved had betrayed them. And that brings us to Junior Seau's story, which we touched on earlier but deserves more attention. Seau wasn't just a great player. He was the embodiment of everything the NFL wanted to represent. He was tough, playing through injuries that would sideline most players. He was passionate, wearing his emotions on his sleeve and inspiring teammates with his intensity. He was durable, playing in 268 games over 20 seasons without ever missing significant time. But on May 2, 2012, at age 43, Seau shot himself in the chest at his home in Oceanside, California. Like Dave Duerson, he shot himself in the chest rather than the head, presumably so his brain could be studied. His family donated his brain to the National Institutes of Health, and researchers found clear evidence of CTE. Seau's suicide became a tipping point in the conversation about football and brain injuries. It forced the NFL to take concussion seriously, led to rule changes designed to protect players, and sparked a national debate about whether football was worth the cost. But it also raised uncomfortable questions that the league still hasn't fully answered. If players like Seau, who seemed mentally strong and well-adjusted, could be suffering in silence, how many others were struggling? How many former players were dealing with depression, memory loss, and cognitive decline without anyone knowing? And most importantly, what was the NFL going to do about it? The league has implemented concussion protocols, funded research, and made rule changes to reduce head contact. But critics argue it's not enough, that the fundamental nature of football, grown men colliding at high speeds, makes brain injuries inevitable. Seau's death didn't just change the conversation about player safety. It forced everyone to confront the reality that football, the sport millions of Americans love, might be fundamentally dangerous in ways we can't fix. While Seau's story highlighted the physical toll of football, the story of Ricky Williams revealed the mental health struggles that often go unnoticed. Williams, as we discussed earlier, walked away from football in 2004 to deal with social anxiety disorder, but his full story is more complex. Williams grew up in a difficult environment, moved frequently as a child, and struggled with feelings of inadequacy despite his athletic success. At the University of Texas, he won the Heisman Trophy but admitted later that he felt uncomfortable with the attention. In the NFL, the pressure intensified. He was drafted 5th overall by the New Orleans Saints, and the team immediately made him the face of the franchise, putting his image on everything from billboards to season tickets. The expectations were crushing. Williams said he'd sometimes sit in his car in the parking lot before games, dreading having to go inside. He used marijuana to calm his nerves, which led to failed drug tests and suspensions. When he finally walked away in 2004, it wasn't just about avoiding suspension, it was about preserving his mental health. Williams spent a year traveling through Asia and Australia, studying holistic medicine and trying to figure out who he was outside of football. When he returned in 2005, he was a different person. He'd accepted his social anxiety, started therapy, and found healthier ways to cope. He played 6 more seasons, finishing his career with over 10,000 rushing yards, and transitioned into a role as an advocate for mental health awareness and cannabis legalization. Williams's story is important because it showed that mental health struggles aren't a sign of weakness, that even elite athletes can suffer from anxiety and depression, and that walking away from a sport that's making you miserable isn't quitting, it's survival. But not every player had the self-awareness to walk away when they should have. Steve McNair, the former Tennessee Titans quarterback and co-MVP in 2003, played through pain for his entire career. He had a reputation as one of the toughest players in the league, regularly taking the field with injuries that would sideline most quarterbacks. But that toughness came at a cost. On July 4th, 2009, McNair was found dead in a Nashville condominium, shot multiple times. Police determined it was a murder-suicide committed by Sahel Kazemi, a 20-year-old woman McNair had been having an affair with. Kazemi had been struggling financially and emotionally, and when she discovered McNair was seeing other women, she snapped. The case shocked the NFL community and revealed the complicated private life of a player who had been seen as a family man and role model. McNair left behind a wife and 4 children, and his death cast a shadow over his legacy. He'd been a warrior on the field, leading the Titans to a Super Bowl and earning the respect of teammates and opponents alike. But off the field, his personal decisions caught up with him in the most tragic way possible. McNair's story is a reminder that we often don't know what's happening in the private lives of the players we idolize, and that the image they project publicly can be very different from their reality. Then there's the story of Sean Taylor, the Washington safety who was one of the most feared hitters in the NFL. Taylor was drafted 5th overall in 2004 out of the University of Miami, where he'd been an All-American. In the NFL, he quickly established himself as a game changer, a safety who could cover receivers, stop the run, and deliver bone-crushing hits that made highlight reels. He made 2 Pro Bowls and was on pace to be one of the greatest safeties in NFL history. But on November 26, 2007, Taylor's life was cut short in a home invasion. Intruders broke into his Miami home in the middle of the night while he was there with his girlfriend and infant daughter. When Taylor confronted them, he was shot in the upper leg, severing his femoral artery. He was rushed to the hospital and underwent emergency surgery. But he died the next day from blood loss. He was just 24 years old. The NFL community was devastated. Teammates, opponents, and fans mourned a player who had been taken far too soon. Washington players wore his number 21 on their helmets for the remainder of the season, and he was posthumously selected to the Pro Bowl. The investigation revealed that the intruders were young men from the area who knew Taylor's house, thought it would be empty, and were looking to steal cash. They didn't know he was home. It was a senseless tragedy, a random act of violence that robbed the NFL of one of its brightest stars. Taylor's story is a reminder that life is fragile, that success and fame can't protect you from tragedy, and that sometimes being in the wrong place at the wrong time is all it takes. And speaking of tragic endings, the story of Pat Tillman stands apart from every other story in NFL history. Tillman was a safety for the Arizona Cardinals, drafted in the 7th round in 1998 out of Arizona State. He wasn't supposed to make it in the NFL. He was undersized at 5'11" and didn't have elite speed, but he made up for it with intelligence, toughness, and relentless effort. By 2000, he'd become a starter and set a franchise record for tackles in a season. The Cardinals offered him a 5-year, $9 million contract extension, but Tillman turned it down. Instead, in May 2002, following the September 11th attacks, Tillman and his brother Kevin enlisted in the U.S. Army. They completed Army Ranger training and were deployed to Iraq and then Afghanistan. Tillman's decision shocked the sports world. He was walking away from millions of dollars and the peak of his career to serve his country. He gave few interviews about the decision, saying only that it was something he felt he needed to do. On April 22, 2004, Tillman was killed during a firefight in Afghanistan. He was 27 years old. Initially, the Army reported that he died heroically in combat, and his death was used as a rallying cry for the war effort. But weeks later, the truth emerged. Tillman had been killed by friendly fire, accidentally shot by his own unit in a chaotic situation. The Army had known this almost immediately, but had covered it up, fabricating a heroic story to preserve morale and used Tillman's death for propaganda purposes. When the cover-up was revealed, Tillman's family was devastated and furious. They demanded answers, and congressional hearings were held to investigate how the military had handled the case. The scandal tarnished the military's reputation and raised serious questions about how soldier deaths were being reported. Tillman was posthumously promoted and awarded the Silver Star and Purple Heart, but his family rejected the honors, saying they were based on lies. The Pat Tillman Foundation was created in his memory to provide scholarships for veterans and their families, and his story remains one of the most complex and controversial in sports history. Tillman gave up everything for his country, and in return, the truth about his death was buried beneath layers of lies and propaganda. But while Tillman's story involved lies from the military, Lawrence Phillips's story was defined by a pattern of violence that everyone saw coming, but nobody could stop. Phillips was a running back out of the University of Nebraska, a key part of back-to-back national championship teams in 1994 and 1995. He was explosive, powerful, and seemingly unstoppable on the field. But off the field, he had a well-documented history of violence. In 1995, while still at Nebraska, Phillips dragged his ex-girlfriend down 3 flights of stairs by her hair after finding her in another football player's room. He was arrested and charged with assault, but Nebraska coach Tom Osborne controversially allowed him to keep playing after a brief suspension. Critics blasted Osborne for prioritizing winning over accountability, but Osborne defended the decision, saying he believed Phillips could be rehabilitated through structure and discipline. The St. Louis Rams drafted Phillips 6th overall in 1996, hoping his talent would overcome his behavioral issues. It didn't. Phillips clashed with coaches, fought with teammates, and was inconsistent on the field. The Rams released him after less than 2 seasons. He bounced to Miami, San Francisco, and eventually the Canadian Football League, but the same pattern repeated everywhere. Flashes of brilliance followed by violence and chaos. In 2005, Phillips was arrested for assaulting his girlfriend. In 2008, he was arrested for driving a car into 3 teenagers after a pickup football game. He was sentenced to 31 years in prison for assault. Then, in 2009, while already serving that sentence, Phillips was charged with murdering his cellmate. According to prosecutors, Phillips had choked his cellmate to death following an argument. Before the murder case went to trial, Lawrence Phillips was found dead in his prison cell in January 2016. The official cause was suicide by hanging. An autopsy later revealed that Phillips had CTE, severe brain damage that likely contributed to his violent behavior. His story is one of the darkest in NFL history, a talented player whose life was defined by violence, poor decisions, and an inability to control his impulses. And it raises the uncomfortable question, could Phillips have been saved? Or was he doomed from the start, a product of his environment, his brain damage, and a system that enabled him as long as he could play football? The truth is, we'll never know. What we do know is that the NFL is filled with stories like these. Stories of players who rose to incredible heights and then fell just as far. Some fell because of injuries, like Junior Seau and Mike Webster. Some fell because of addiction, like Brett Favre and Chris Carter. Some fell because of poor decisions, like Ray Caruth and Aaron Hernandez. And some fell because the game they loved destroyed them from the inside out. These stories are uncomfortable, tragic, and often difficult to reconcile with the highlight reels and championship celebrations we remember. But they're also important because they remind us that the players we idolize are human, flawed, and vulnerable. They remind us that football, for all its glory, comes at a cost. And they force us to ask ourselves, is it worth it? Is the entertainment we get from watching these men destroy their bodies and minds worth the price they pay? The NFL has made changes in recent years, implementing stricter concussion protocols, banning certain types of hits, and providing more support for retired players. But the fundamental nature of the game hasn't changed. It's still violent, still dangerous, and still capable of ruining lives. And as long as we keep watching, keep cheering, and keep demanding more, the cycle will continue. Legends will rise, legends will fall, and we'll be left with the stories, the memories, and the uncomfortable truth that the game we love is built on the broken bodies and minds of the men who play it.